Inshallah, go and get started, but before we get into today's session, just some background on what this is and just some cadences. So the background on the book, we divided into 94 sections, and each section or chapter, in Arabic it's called bab, so door, but more so meaning chapter, is covering a different topic, and then the writer, the author, he brings ayat and ahadith related to that topic, and then some of his own comments. And there, a lot of them are reminders, relevant things, like today, for example, the topic will be about ikhlas, so what is ikhlas, and different hallmarks and that kind of things. But the reason why this book is that the nature of it is that it's very short chapters that have good reminders that you can very easily extend into discussions, into a lecture, and this kind of thing. So the session will be weekly. It will probably go for like 20 to 35 minutes. Again, variety of topics, and then we'll probably have like a Q&A or comments at the end. And then again, the goal is to like awaken our hearts by reflecting on a variety of topics, again in the light of the Quran and Sunnah, based on this. So and then another cadence. We can maybe do Slido in the future, because I know there was recommendations for that. So inshallah, if that's something you guys want to do, we can do that. So now about the author, he is a classical Hanafi scholar. So from the 3rd century Hijri. So it's a very classical book. All the way goes back 1100 years ago. And essentially, the book is written by the author named Abu Layth Samarqandi, rahimahullah. And he again was a faqih, a master of the Islamic sciences, and he compiled this book and many other books. He has tafsir and that kind of stuff. And anyone who's familiar with the Hanafi madhab, I'm sure is familiar with Samarqandi. Now, regarding that, there is a small side point for people who are looking for the book. I couldn't find the book in English, so I only have the Arabic copy. But someone was mentioning before there is an Urdu version, so that's easily accessible. Now, the last thing also about the book is that the book has a lot of weak ahadith, and some of them are even mawdu'. And the meaning that it's a hadith that is a complete lie about Rasulullah Prophet. And the point here is that this hadith is not supposed to be quoted in the book, and it's not supposed to be dated back to the Prophet. Now, when you look into classical works, they do usually have weak ahadith that are reported, and a lot of times without the sanad. But the version of the book I'm using, there's tahqiq done, which is like takhrij of the hadith, which means like going through and grading each hadith, that this is a sahih hadith, this is weak, this should be relied upon, this shouldn't be relied upon. Or for example, there's even some quotations that there is no grading on it, meaning that the person who did the research of that book, they couldn't find any grading for this certain hadith. So the key point here is that if someone were to read it on the side on their own, I would definitely caution about that. So buy a copy that allows you to filter through the weak ahadith, because if you don't have like a background in hadith sciences, you might be able to be confused actually by a hadith that is actually weak and it's saying something that you might think contradicts, and the whole time it's not even a hadith. So that's a very important short note. And if anyone wants to read the Arabic version, I can give you the copy I have with the exact tahqiq done by this certain scholar. So to get into today's topic, the first thing we'll talk about is what is ikhlas. So he says, or the definition of ikhlas is صرف العمل متقربا به إلى الله وحده لا رياء ولا سمعة ولا طلبا للدنيا ولا تصنعا للخلق وإنما يرجو به ثواب الله تعالى ويخشى عقابه ويطمع في رضاه. So ikhlas is, and this is again one formal definition, but it's doing good deeds to draw closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and draw closer to Him alone, and not without any riyat, meaning any showing off or any thinking of your reputation, and nor seeking any worldly gain, nor pretending to be good to people. Rather, one hopes for the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fears His punishment, and looks for His pleasure. So this is a very formal definition, I'm sure most of us are familiar with this, of ikhlas. And a key point to reflect on is, for those of you who are remember we went through the Nawawi session, notice the first hadith in that series started off talking about intentions. That إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. That verily actions are based off their intentions, and that every person will be rewarded in according to their intention. And notice this book also starts off with Babul Ikhlas, with the chapter of Ikhlas. So, and this is something you'll find in a lot of classical works, that these books are always started off with a reminder of intention and a reminder of Ikhlas, because of how important it is, of course, but also the fact that it needs to be repeated over and over again. And that we'll see towards the end of the session, that this is something that it has to be premeditated. That before I go into an action, in this case the author, going into writing the book, the author is like taking a step back and reaffirming ikhlas, reaffirming sincerity for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you're looking for the acceptance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking the reward for that. So this is a very important point for us to reflect on. And so the author starts off with a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he says, أَخْوَفُ مَا أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ الشِّرْكُ الْأَصْغَرُ. That the thing that I fear for you the most is minor shirk, like the minor shirk. So obviously the Sahaba say, Ya Rasulullah, وَمَا الشِّرْكُ الْأَصْغَرُ. What is, the lesser shirk? And the Prophet responds and he says, الرِّيَاء يقول الله تعالى لهم يوم يجازي العباد بأعمالهم اذهبوا إلى الذين كنتم تراؤون لهم في الدنيا فانظروا هل تجدوا عندهم خيرا. That الشرك الأصغر, the lesser shirk, is riya, is showing off. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say to them, the ones who had riya, the ones who showed off in their actions, He will tell them, go to the ones who you were trying to show off to in the dunya, and look, do you find any good or any reward you can get from them? So imagine when you think about this concept that in this dunya, if your intention is not clear before doing something, and you do something for the sake of riya, that I want to get a certain reaction from people if I do something, or I'm doing something because I want to impress a certain individual, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring you on the day of judgment and bring that person in front of you and say, go and ask him for the good deeds. And that action that you did will be nullified in terms of the reward. So again, that's a very a scary concept to think about, and again, highlights the importance of ikhlas and why we're starting off with it. And Samarqandi, he says, the author, إِنَّمَا يُقَالُ لَهُمْ ذَلِكَ لِأَنَّ عَمَلَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا كَانَ عَلَى وَجْهِ الْخِدَاعِ. That verily this is said to them because what they did in this dunya was, it had a trait of deception. And look at the word deception. فَيُعَامَلُونَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ عَلَى وَجْهِ الْخِدَاعِ. And because they had deception in their action, meaning it portrays outwardly, that's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm doing da'wah for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But maybe inwardly, inside, this person actually was not thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This person was thinking about, the positive reaction I might get, or what people might think of me. So because of this deception that this person covered his action with, this person is treated in the akhirah with deception, in the sense that this person thought he would get rewarded for his action, he was doing a great deed, when in reality, he isn't getting that. وَهُوَ كَمَا قَالَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى. And this is as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهُ وَهُوَ خَادِعُهُم. That the munafiqeen, verily they're attempting to trick or deceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَهُوَ خَادِعُهُم. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is tricking them, the one who is deceiving them. يعني, and he says, meaning, يُجَازِيهِمْ جَزَاءَ الْخِدَاعِ فَيُبْطِلُ ثَوَابَ أَعْمَالِهِم. He gives them the reward of deception, which is nothing. فَيُبْطِلُ ثَوَابَ أَعْمَالِهِم. So the thawab, the good deeds that come from their actions, that is nullified. وَيَقُولُ لَهُمْ اذْهَبُوا إِلَى الَّذِينَ عَمِلْتُمْ لِأَجْلِهِمْ فَإِنَّهُ لَا ثَوَابَ لِأَعْمَالِكُمْ عِنْدِي لِأَنَّهَا لَمْ تَكُنْ خَالِصَةً لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And he responds to them and says the same thing, that you should go to these people that you were trying to show off to and ask them for the reward for them. وإنما يستوجب العبد الثواب إذا كان عمله خالصا لوجه الله تعالى فإذا كان لغيره فيه شركة فالله بريء منه. And that the only time you can be rewarded for an action, and again this is talking about from your salah, from your 5 daily prayers, all the way up to any action you do in general, anything, if it's not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's what it's saying over here, that إِنَّمَا يَسْتَوْجِبُ, the only time you will get this reward for your action is if you clearly have ikhlas. That means you're doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're not looking for anyone else's pleasure. And if you are, then he says, فَاللَّهُ بَرِيءٌ مِّنْهُ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, disassociating himself or staying far away, or has absolutely nothing to do with the person or the action that they did, when they have riyah. And a key point to reflect on when we're talking about this topic is in ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْآخِرَةَ وَسَعَى لَهَا سَعْيَهَا وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَأُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ سَعْيُهُمْ مَشْكُورًا. That whoever desires the hereafter and strives for it accordingly and is a true believer, it is they whose striving will be appreciated. كُلًّا نُمِدُّ هَؤُلَاءِ وَهَؤُلَاءِ مِنْ عَطَاءِ رَبِّكَ وَمَا كَانُوا عَطَاءُ رَبِّكَ مَحْظُورًا. That we provide both the former and the latter from the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can never be withheld. So the context of this ayah, as Samarqandi explains, he says, يعني يعطى كل الفريقين من رزق ربك, that both teams or both sections or both people, the former and the latter, are given rizq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And who is the former and the latter? He says, من المؤمن والكافر والبر والفاجر فقد بين الله تعالى في هذه الآية أن من عمل لغير وجه الله فلا ثواب له في الآخرة ومأواه جهنم. And he says that these two people are the mu'min and the kafir, the believer and the disbeliever, the bir and fajr, the person who is righteous amongst the believers and the person who is corrupt amongst the believers and the disbelievers. So all of these people are being given rizq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the key difference here is that their rizq and their actions and everything they do in their life, it's constricted to the benefit in this dunya. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constricting them and denying from them the reward from the akhirah. Versus the mu'min, the believer, the person who has taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the person who's bir, who's righteous, this person is actually reaping the actual rewards of his action. And he says the ones who obviously do the opposite, then مَأْوَاهُ جَهَنَّمْ, this person will be in Jahannam. وَمَنْ عَمِلَ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فَعَمَلُهُ مَقْبُولٌ, and the person who does his actions for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then his actions are accepted. وَإِذَا عَمِلَ لِغَيْرِ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فَلَا نَصِيبَ لَهُ مِنْ عَمَلِهِ إِلَّا الْعَنَاءُ وَالتَّعَبُ كَمَا جَاءَ فِي الْخَبَرِ. And this is like a very interesting point, that the person, the believer, or the person who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he does a certain action, he might put so much time into it. Like if you think about it this way, if you take the same example I mentioned before, someone is doing da'wah and he puts so much time into his da'wah. He puts effort, he puts time, he puts money, he puts everything into his da'wah. And he doesn't have a clear intention for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then a Samarqandi is saying that when the day of judgment comes and his reward is nullified, this person, all he gained from his actions is al-ana'i wa ta'ab, which is just, being tired and fatigue. That's all he gained from his action. All you gained was just actually negative in this dunya, that, you thought you were doing something, that was good, and you thought merely doing it was good enough, and in reality, making clear the intention for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with ikhlas, that is what will turn, fatigue and wasted time into beneficial time that you'll be rewarded for on the day of judgment. And an example of a lack of sincerity that is mentioned in this chapter, it's a very, very poetic example. So he says, the example of one who performs acts of obedience for show and reputation is like that of a man who goes out to the marketplace and fills his bag with pebbles. So he has, you can imagine a grocery bag, and he has pebbles or stones inside of this bag. And so people say, look how full this man's bag is. It's huge. Look how much stuff is inside it. And at the same time, there is no benefit to him except for people's talk. The only thing he's gaining from this bag is what people are saying about him. Even if he wanted to buy something, he would not be given anything in return. These stones aren't valuable. He can't even buy anything with it. But people think he has, so much gold and so much money and so much this inside the bag, when in reality it's just stones. And likewise, the one who performs acts for show and reputation will not benefit from his work except for people's talk, and he will receive no reward. And again, this perspective is important to reflect on. That this person who's carrying the bag, the same way we mentioned before, al-anat wa ta'ab, that this person, all he's gaining from this action is just fatigue and tiredness and effort that he's putting in, which is wasted. Because people will say, yes, look, he has a huge bag full of money, this person is so rich, this person is this person is that. But in the akhirah, he'll come absolutely bankrupt. And so, the next question that comes very naturally is, like, what are some signs of ikhlas, or how do I know that, this is a sign of ikhlas, or someone is mukhlas? So, Samarqandi mentions, مَنْ عَمِلَ سَبْعَةً دُونَ سَبْعَةٍ لَمْ يَنْتَفِعْ بِمَا يَعْمَلْ. And he mentions that if someone does, set these things without these 7 conditions, then this person will not benefit from what he did. And I won't mention all 7 of them because it's a little bit longer, but I'll mention some of the relevant points he mentions very quickly. He says in the second, أن يعمل بالرجاء دون الطلب، يعني يقول إني أرجو ثواب الله تعالى ولا يطلبه بالأعمال الصالحة لم تنفعه مقالته شيئا. That the person, he has hope, look how general these terms are, he has hope دون الطلب, without actually doing action. Which means, as Samarqandi says, that I, for example, I hope thawab from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want, good deeds or good reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا يَطْلُبُهُ بِالْأَعْمَالِ الصَّالِحَةِ. But he doesn't actually do anything. He doesn't take actions, righteous actions, to get that reward. لَمْ تَنْفَعَهُ مَقَالَتُهُ شَيْئًا. Then him saying that, oh, I really want, a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this hope he had, it will not benefit him in the slightest. And the key point here, brothers and sisters, that we want to do here is we want to take these texts and refer them and relate them actually to our time. That this idea of raja, of hope in Islam, it's not only for the example he mentioned, the small example he mentioned, for example, you're looking for the good deeds from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you don't take any action. You're looking for the reward of salah, but you don't pray salah. You're looking for the reward of siyam, but you don't do siyam. Of course it makes sense, right? But if we relate it to ourselves right now, how many of us, for example, we say that we want to see, a free Palestine. We want to see the Ummah in a better situation. We want to see 1, 2, 3 fix. We want to see this, we want to see that. That we want to see the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be respected in this land. We want the blood of a Muslim, which is worth more than the Kaaba, the blood of one Muslim, we want that to be respected, right? He says, العمل بالرجاء دون الطلب, that to have this hope, this hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will make the situation better, or the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come to the place that it's supposed to be, without a talab, without taking action towards it, without putting in the effort, then this, on the Day of Judgment, لَمْ تَنْفَعُهُ مَقَالَتُهُ شَيْئًا. That someone who says, I want to see, we have to do something for Gaza. This situation is very, very tough, it's very, very unfortunate, and we have to fix it. We have to, help out the Muslims. The Muslim is, the brother of another Muslim. This is one body, etc. These ideas that I'm sure we've heard so much of. If they stay ideas and they stay statements that don't translate into action, this is again a huge loss. And the fourth one, he says, بالدعاء دون الجهد، يعني يدعو الله تعالى أن يوفقه للخير ولا يجتهد لم ينفعه دعاءه شيئا. And the fourth one is making dua without putting, juhd is struggle or effort. Meaning, as Samarqandi says, meaning he does dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he supplicates to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to يوفقه للخير, that guide him or give him success in doing good. ولا يجتهد, but he doesn't put effort or struggle in this. لم ينفعه دعاءه شيئا, then his dua will not benefit him in the slightest. And notice here, the depth of the wording chosen. He says, للخير ولا يجتهد. Actually, before that, يعني يدعو الله تعالى أن يوفقه للخير ولا يجتهد لم ينفعه دعاءه شيئا. That this person, he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to, give him good or to do good actions, but he doesn't put the effort in, the juhd, the actual struggle for this. Because someone who wants good in the akhirah, he has to put that effort in. And he'll mention an ayah about this. He says, continues, وَيَنْبَغِي لَهُ أَنْ يَجْتَهِدَ لِيُوَفِّقَهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى كَمَا قَالَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى. And he must struggle and put effort, like massive effort, to do good deeds if he wants Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him success. Because of the ayah, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. That verily those who, it mentions you're doing jihad, fi subrina, the ones who walk in our path struggling, here the linguistic meaning, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide him on this path, in that verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with the muhsinin. Because someone who has ihsan, and this is a topic that can be its own lecture, but we've covered it beforehand. But part of ihsan is not just saying that, okay, fine, I understand I have to back up my words with action, and therefore when I make dua, I'm going to do some action. But then you run into a blocker, you run into a wall, and at this point you kind of give up. You're like, okay, khalas, this is too hard. Like a very practical example, that you have to pray, but because class time is inconvenient on Fridays, or a certain lecture is only available at this certain time, that you have to be at Jum'ah, you say, okay, well, this is too difficult, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive me, I'll just skip Jum'ah. Again, this is you're putting effort. You're making sure that if there is a blocker, I have to remove the blocker. And if I can't remove the blocker, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, is Ghafur Rahim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the effort you put in, which is why the highlight here about dua is the effort. To benefit from the dua, you have to have that effort. And the sixth one is بالعلانية دون السريرة، يعني يصلح أموره في العلانية ولا يصلحها في السر لم تنفعه علانيته شيئا. That the sixth one is the person is outwardly sincere, but on the inside لم يصلح أموره في العلانية. دون السريرة يعني يصلح أموره في العلانية ولا يصلحها في السر. That the person, he corrects his actions or does good outwardly, but he doesn't correct or do good inwardly. Then this action that he's doing is not going to benefit him. So again, a very practical example that happens to us all the time is you compare your salah when you're alone in your room versus when you're in the masjid, for example, or you're next to someone with your friends, you're in public in general, and you compare the quality in both situations. Then in these situations where you see disparity between the two, and you see that one is of higher quality than the other, then this is a situation where you should be reflecting and revisiting your intentions with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That am I actually having ikhlas in my salah? Or is there a little bit of riyah, of showing off, that I need to clean? Because that's the nature of the heart of a Muslim. And we'll get to this more towards the end of the lecture, but it needs cleaning. And cleaning is, a very regular thing that has to happen. But a very scary example of this is a couple of ayats from Surah Hadid, where Allah says, يوم ترى المؤمنين والمؤمنات يسعى نورهم بين أيديهم وبأيمانهم بشراكم اليوم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها ذلك هو الفوز العظيم. That one day you'll be seeing on Day of Judgment the believing men and women with their light shining ahead of them on their right. They will be told, today you have good news of Jannat tajri min tahtiha al-anhar, gardens under which rivers flow. And for you, you will stay here forever. That is truly the ultimate triumph. So setting this beautiful example of the believers. It says next, يَوْمَ يَقُولُ الْمُنَافِقُونَ وَالْمُنَافِقَاتِ. That the hypocrites, from the male and female of them, لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, they will say this to the believing people who are in this amazing situation. انظُرُونَا نَقْتَبِسْ مِن نُورِكُمْ. That, let us, wait for us, we can have some of this light that you used to have. قِيلَ ارْجِعُوا وَرَاءَكُمْ فَالْتَمِسُوا نُورًا فَضُرِبَ بَيْنَهُمْ بِسُورٍ لَهُ بَابٌ بَاطِنُهُ فِيهِ الرَّحْمَةُ وَظَاهِرُهُ مِنْ قِبَلِهِ الْعَذَابُ. That when they go, seeking, let us get some of this light that you have with you, they will be pushed back, and look for light look for light somewhere else, and a like barrier will come down that will separate between them. And on the near side, on one side, on their side will be, on the believing men and women's side will have grace, like a very nice, this separating barrier that is very nice to look at. Versus on the far side will be torment. So what's the picture the Quran is trying to paint here? That the believing men and women, they're going to be in this beautiful situation. And then the hypocrites will be in a very dark situation. And they're going to look towards the believers and say, hey, let us be with you. Let us get some of that light that you guys have. And the reaction will be that they will be pushed back, and a separator will come in that will make the situation of the believing men and women even better, and the situation of the hypocrites even worse. And this last ayah is the key part. يُنَادُونَهُمْ أَلَمْ نَكُمْ مَعَكُمْ. That they call out, these hypocrites, they call out to the believers, weren't we with you in this dunya? قالوا بلى ولكنكم فتنتم أنفسكم وتربصتم وارتبتم وغرتكم الأماني حتى جاء أمر الله وغركم بالله الغرور. That the tormented, when they say this, we're not with you in this dunya, they reply, yes, you were, but you chose to be tempted by hypocrisy, eagerly awaited our demise, doubted the truth, and were deluded by false hopes until Allah's decree of your death came to pass. And so the chief deceiver, al-gharur, which is shaitan, deceived you about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The lesson here is that in dunya, you will have munafiqeen and mu'mineen in the same gathering. That if you think back to the first incidents of nifaq, if you go back into Medina, where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, you had hypocrites who were amongst you, sitting with in gatherings with the Sahaba, the best of generations, with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, sitting in blessed gatherings with so much light and nur there. But these people on the day of judgment, because of their actions and lack of ikhlas in this dunya, they're going to be scrambling for the light that they used to be around in dunya. So, and again, the reflection, the mind here should be thinking that, what if I could be one of them? Because we know the hadith of Rasulullah where he says, الْمَرْءُ عَلَى دِينِ خَلِيلٍ فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ مَنْ يُخَالِلُهُ. That the man is on the deen of his friend, his close friend. So each of you should look and be careful about who you take as a close friend. So of course, to understand that the first step to being a better Muslim in practicing this deen is to surround yourself with people who practice the deen. But even past that, a person has to be careful and revisit his ikhlas, because he might surround himself with people who are sincere, but he might be one of those hypocrites who come the day of judgment absolutely bankrupt and regret not benefiting from the light that they surround themselves with in this dunya. And I'll skip some because we're running out of time. But some key parts he also talks about in the chapter. He talks about ikhlas in public and private, which we touched on a little bit. And the question was asked, man al-mukhlis? Who is the person who has ikhlas? قال المخلص الذي كتم حسناته كما يكتم سيئاته. That the person who has ikhlas is the person who hides his good deeds the same way he hides his bad deeds. So again, we know the hadith about charity, that you should give in a manner that your right hand doesn't know your left hand. So the idea here is that you're trying to absolutely dissolve any possibility of riyah, of showing off, coming into your action. And this is a very, very important point. And just to mention, he gives examples of the opposite, where he says, لِلْمُرَائِ أَرْبَعُ عَلَامَاتٍ. That the person who does riyah, who does showing off, he has four signs. يَكْسَلُ إِذَا كَانَ وَحْدَهُ. That if he's by himself, he's lazy. وَيَنْشَطُ إِذَا كَانَ مَعَ النَّاسِ. But he's very active and he's very, on his feet when he's with the people. وَيَزِيدُ فِي الْعَمَلِ إِذَا أُثْنِيَ عَلَيْهِ. And he increases in his action and focus and doing better when people give him compliments. وَيَنْقُصُ إِذَا ذُمَّ بِهِ. And he decreases in his action if people respond to him in a negative manner. So notice the meter, the yardstick for measuring the effort in the action here is Am I in public? Okay, I have to do this very well. I have to show myself that I'm someone who does 1, 2, 3. And are people responding to me in a positive manner and give me compliments and this kind of stuff? Then I have to keep on doing this and do even better, do more. Do people respond negatively and say, hey, actually, or someone might say something and you don't get the reaction that you wanted from the people? Regardless, not thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala proud of me? Is He pleased with me? Is this something that gains the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Putting that to the side, and saying, what do the people think? And now the last point is, so how do we know if I'm sincere? How do I know I'm sincere? It's a very important question that all of us obviously think of when talking about this topic. The short answer is you can't actually 100% know. And you won't know, obviously this is a very scary thought, but you won't know until you come Yawm al-Qiyamah and your deeds are written in front of you, and you're going to find out whether your deeds are turned into haba'an manthura, that your pages will be scattered everywhere and rejected, or they'll be accepted. And this is something that is taught by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We all know the dua, for example, Allahumma muqallib al-qulub thabbit qalbi ala dinik, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the flipper of hearts, or like the rotator of hearts, keep my heart firm on your deen. So this is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep his heart steadfast. And he taught this dua to the Sahaba. And not even that, we know the ayah where it says, وَلَوْلَا إِن ثَبَّتْنَاكَ لَقَدْ كِدْتَ تَرْكَنُ إِلَيْهِمْ شَيْئًا قَلِيلًا, that if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if he was not fastened or made steadfast by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لَقَدْ كِدْتَ تَرْكَنُ إِلَيْهِمْ شَيْئًا قَلِيلًا, then you might have inclined to them a little bit. And even more so, if you say he's a prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what's an example? Is there a Sahaba? The Sahaba had this worry. Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, on his deathbed, he was asking Hudayfa ibn Yaman, the one who had the list of munafiqeen, to ask him and say, am I on that list? As he's dying, and he's guaranteed Jannah. So this thought always needs to be running in your mind, and it's actually a good thing, which is the point to answer this question. That you're reflecting and saying, I don't know if I'm sincere or not. Am I actually sincere? These aren't negative thoughts, these are good thoughts. Because they're supposed to result in positive action. That you take action to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you make sure to free yourself of any showing off. And it should not be like a huge worry on the believer's mind that causes him to think that everything he does is not going to be accepted because he's not perfect. And again, there's more to say about that. And the last point I wanted to mention, which is actually a hadith of Rasulullah where he says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَيُؤَيِّدُ هَذَا الدِّينَ بِالرَّجُلِ الْفَاجِرِ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala verily, in the context behind the hadith, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will support this deen through the man who is corrupt. Through a corrupt man, he will support this deen. So especially again, when we're thinking about any da'wah you do, or you're thinking about your involvement in the MSA, or you're thinking about good you do in the community, volunteering, etc. All of these good things you do, you shouldn't think and be tricked by shaitan that because you do X, Y, Z, that you are someone who is sincere, that you're someone who is muttaqi, someone who has taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're so pious because of you do 1, 2, 3 actions. Because the hadith is guaranteeing for us that someone who is fajr is a high level of corruption. This person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses him to support the deen. So the outcomes that you've done for the religion or the community or etc., that you think you have these accolades set, these aren't, and they cannot be made to think that, oh, this is because I've done this, I have to be sincere. Or even for other people, that he's done so much, he must be sincere. And just real quick, we'll just brush by the last part because how important it is, which is the conclusion where he says that in action, it has to have 4 things to be good. And this is again what we want to walk away with from this lecture. That we want to walk away with a practical understanding of how to implement ikhlas, and this is how he mentioned it at the end. He says, I'll read the English, the first is knowledge before beginning it, because action is not valid without knowledge. If an action is performed without knowledge, what spoils it is greater than what improves it. So the key point here is that before you do something, and this is a longer, there can be a lot of commentary on this, but you have to have a dalil, meaning you have to know that what you're doing is halal, is it haram, where does it fall in, and then go based off of that. The second is intention at the outset. So before you start, you have to, again, just like we mentioned in the beginning, revisiting the intention. And you have to make clear your intention. And the third is patience in its middle. The third is patience in its middle, meaning that one must be patient during it until he performs it with tranquility and peace of mind. So when you're doing this action, just like I mentioned before, you might run into a wall, you might run into a problem, and you have to have patience when running into that problem. You might, again, like the example we gave of Jum'ah, that you can't just be like, oh, I began in sincere intention, I did want to pray Jum'ah, but when I ran into a conflict with the class, I was like, okay, close, there's no need to do any more. This is standing my way. I'll have an excuse in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, this is a very important point. And the last is, and this is the part that I'll try to cover in 1 minute, which is the fourth is sincerity upon completion. And I'll read the Arabic for this one. وَالرَّابِعُ الْإِخْلَاص عِنْدَ فَرَاغِهِ, which is ikhlas when it's done. لأن العمل لا يقبل بغير إخلاص, because action is not accepted unless it has ikhlas. فإذا عملت بالإخلاص يتقبل الله تعالى منك وتقبل قلوب العباد إليك. And if you have ikhlas and you did that action with ikhlas, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept that action. وتقبل القلوب العباد إليك. Then the hearts of people around you will come around you. That's the direct translation here. Meaning, it's referencing, or an indirect reference to a hadith where if you're pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make the people pleased with you. And this is the point he's referring to, that ikhlas, yes, it has this very direct, which is very clear, a direct, personal connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and making sure that your deeds are accepted, but also it will show up in your surroundings. That if you sincerely only look in life in general, you have a principle that if I'm pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then I'm happy. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make the hearts of people around you happy and pleased with you. Versus, the hadith mentions in the beginning of it, that the person who seeks the pleasure of the people, then the people won't even be pleased with him. And this is something that we all know, right? That just saying like you can't please everyone. And of course this is true, you can't please everyone because some people have different perspectives. But if you please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace your surroundings with people who are pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and therefore are pleased with what you do. And the last point on that is that, we didn't get to mention it in depth, but the idea of hifd ta'at, he mentions, which is maintaining or protecting your obedience, meaning that after you do something good or an obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the hardest parts of that ibadah is making sure you keep the ajr, keep the good rewards for that, because if you later, you did an action that was sincere for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and later you come in and ujub comes in, which is like, you're proud, or like you're like, so surprised with yourself that, man, like you're impressed with yourself.